شيك YouTube فتح.
C'est Sylvain qui va présider le jury.
D'accord. Ah, t'as imprimé, super. فتح.
Salut, ça va? Attends, elle va m'imprimer si jamais tu veux récupérer. Ouais. Ouais. On va parler en anglais et pour Maurice, oui, tout le monde fait ça, non? Mais j'ai dans la personne. Ah oui. Et je pense qu'il n'y a pas de problème. C'est tout à fait possible. Vous avez une Maurice de parler anglais, mais tout à fait. Ouais.
So hello everyone, thank you for being here. We welcome you to the PhD defense of Ahmad Chamma. So in the jury we have Ahmad with in video conference. Moritz Gross Wentrup, sorry for your names. He's not here.
Yeah, he's here.
He's here.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, thank you for the introduction. Hello, and my apologies for not being able to be there in person as planned.
No problem. We have so Sylvain Chevalier and the advisors, Bertrand Thirion, and sorry for the name. Thank you. So you have 45 minutes, that's it, for the defense, and then we will ask you questions.
Sorry. Okay, perfect. So, hello everyone, and welcome to my defense. I want to thank you all for attending this presentation. I am very grateful for your presence and your interest in my research. Today, I'll present you a summary of what I achieved in my project entitled A Statistical Interpretation of High-Dimensional Complex Prediction Models for Biomedical Data. Throughout this presentation, we will try to explain the keywords in the title. Today's presentation is structured as follows. So we start by framing the context of the problem that we tackle in this project. Following, I present my two main contributions to the field of interpretable AI. We have a novel conditional importance, we will explain it, and novel block-based importance. And finally, we will explore for neuroimaging applications using the framework we developed in my contributions. Without further ado, let's begin. So we start with one example. Usually in multimodal clinical research or prospective epidemiology, where studies are conducted to explore the relevant factors for a certain disease, we have heterogeneous sources of data. And these sources of data are gathered in biobanks. One example is UK Biobank. UK Biobank, it's a large cohort study of around 500,000 volunteers with ages spanning between 40 and 69. In the work by Dadi et al., they employ we have the UK Biobank. They employ first sociodemographics data, talking about mood and sentiment, age, sex, education, even early life, along with brain imaging variables, so structural and connectivity information from the brain. And the aim is to build proxy measures for mental health. We are talking about age, fluid intelligence, and neuroticism. It's good, but the question is, given sociodemographics data, do brain imaging variables are carrying more unique information on top of it to predict the proxy measures? To answer this question, in the same work by Dadi et al., they assess the importance of each group of sociodemographics, as we can see on the y-axis, by using leave one group in. It means they measure the performance in terms of R2 score on the y-axis by keeping just one group to predict the proxy measures we have, as mentioned, age, intelligence, and neuroticism. Following, they add brain imaging variables. So in the figure, we can see we have dotted lines standing for having no brain variables and solid lines having brain variables. Now, for the results, if we see for age and fluid intelligence, adding brain imaging variables is improving the prediction. But for neuroticism, it's not improving at all. So brain imaging variables are efficient for this prediction. But we have two things here. Okay. First, they don't have a statistical evidence of their insights. So they are like comparing the performance or the improvement, but without statistical evidence. And we don't know which parts of both groups, like sources of sociodemographics and brain variables, are taking part indeed in the prediction. Therefore, we need a precise understanding of the variable's importance first, and we need to understand what is the influence of the correlation between the variables. Okay, so let's start now from the beginning. Traditionally, when talking about statistical inference or statistical learning, we have input data, our design matrix, and our outcome, and we search for the best model that fit the data. It means we use the empirical risk minimization to reduce the loss score function between the predicted values and the ground truth values. We have a good performance, a good inference on the data, but we don't know what's really happening, what is the behavior of these models. This is why there is a subdomain called interpretability that is equally important, and within we have variable importance that is the main focus for this project. To define variable importance, it's about estimating the influence or the impact of a given input feature on the prediction or to the prediction made by a model. Now, for each input feature, we have an importance score, which is good. But as mentioned, we need some statistical evidence. So statistical guarantees are equally important. And by statistical guarantees, we say that we want to find as many relevant variables as possible, but at the same time, we want to control for false positives. It means we have true non-relevant variables, and we don't want to detect more non-relevant variables as relevant. Why? Because first, it is essential for scientific discovery, and second, like next step, it helps us to control the risk in study designs, or even to understand the decision-making process later. And why? Because, as a simple example, in genetic analysis, the cost of examining a falsely detected gene is, or maybe intolerable. It means if we are examining a genome for a certain disease, and we detected a non-relevant variable as relevant, we are wasting our money and our time on something that is statistically not important. Now, if we go back in time, scientists prefer using simple and interpretable models, talking about linear models where the importance scores are related to the coefficients or p-values, and decision trees where the importance of one variable is related to the depth of the conditioning feature. But with large amount of data, we need high capacity prediction models, and these models are complex, so that interpretation is now difficult. It's not as easy as the simple and interpretable models. We have our simple data, we have a black box. This black box, we are searching for the good performance or the best inference on the data, but at the end of the day, we can't open it. It remains a black box. We will use the tools from interpretable AI or explainable AI to provide an explanation to the behavior of these complex models by manipulating the inputs and the outputs. And this explanation is indeed important for the experts for further studies or for the wide population to understand what's happening. In terms of types of explanations, we have First, local versus global. So usually we have instances in our data set. So the local variable importance is searching to explain this model around one instance only. So we have our complex model. They do a linear approximation around one instance, like using line, and they see if it's important or not. Also, we have Shapley values, the well-known, using the cooperation game theory. But we have, as mentioned, big Uruguay biobanks, and we want the importance across all the instances. So we mention global variable importance using, as an example, we have mean decrease accuracy that we will explain later, and, for example, conditional randomization test introduced by Candace et al. Another categorization for explanations is model-specific versus agnostic. So if we take, for example, a decision tree, we can see the features that have an impact on they have an impact on the impurity function of when building the decision tree, which reflect the importance of the variable. Or we can compute the number of occurrences of a variable across a forest. But at the end, we want scientists to try their own models, for example. So we don't want any pre-assumptions on the model we want to use. We focus again on model agnostic. So we have global variable importance and model agnostic. One of the approaches that gather these two, let's say, specialties about global variable importance and model agnostic, but also they, according to Cover et al., they are the only approaches that can bring statistical evidence. They are called removal-based approaches. To better understand, we have our prediction model. We have variables and samples and the outcome y. And the question is variable j important for the prediction? The removal-based approaches, they integrate a certain perturbation on the variable of interest. One example of this perturbation is just leave one covariate out or loco. It means they totally remove the variable of interest. And so we can see here that the design matrix is decomposed into x minus j, the remaining variables, and xj, the variable of interest. This variable is totally removed, but we need, as we can see, we have DNN and DNN prime, so we need to retrain our model. And we check for a drop in the performance in terms of the loss function before and after this substitution. And this is what we mentioned earlier, the mean decrease accuracy. We need to retrain the model after each removal. It's noisy and very expensive. Another example of removal-based approaches introduced by Brayman in his seminal paper about random forest, it's permutation. So instead of totally removing the variable of interest, they permute the values within one column of the variable of interest. So across the same column of the variable. And as we can see, we don't need to retrain the model again. We have the same model, the same fitted model. Also, after B permutations, we obtain statistical evidence on the significance of the variable J. But permutation approach, okay, it solves the problem of being expensive and noisy when compared to loco, for example, but it's also biased. Why? According to the work by Strobel et al., back to 2008, they introduce an example. We have, as we can see, 12 variables. 1 to 3 are relevant variables, and also 5 to 7. 5 to 12 are independent. They are not correlated at all. But 1 to 4, they have a block correlation with a high degree of 0.9. We should expect to have 4 and 8 to 12 are not relevant. What they discover that from 7 to 12, they are not relevant, which is okay for 7. It's a false negative for now. 1 to 3, 5, and 6 are relevant. It's good. But 4, it gets more weight compared to 5 and 6. So we have now a problem of fake significant variable. 4 should be not non-significant, but it is detected as significant. To provide more evidence why the permutation is not the correct approach, we take the work by Me et al. It's a state-of-the-art method using a DNN learner, and they deploy the permutation approach. here we have the importance score function. Mu hat is the estimator. So mu is the function that maps x to y, and the mu hat is the estimator of y given x trained on n-train. We have n split it between n-train and n-test. The base learner trained on n-train, and the importance is assessed on n-test. And the importance score function here is just the difference between the mean squared error before and after this permutation. How they compute the valid p-values? We have x minus j, again, the remaining variables, xj, the variable of interest. They shuffle it b times, so we have b versions of shuffled variable of interest. They are both fed along with the remaining variables to the base learner. Again, we have a DNN, and compute the loss function or the importance function. Then they compute a t-statistic and to get p-values. And for the p-values to be valid, the t-statistic, when b tends to infinity, the number of shuffled copies, the t-statistic should follow a standard normal distribution. So here, the trained model is used to assess the importance on just the n-test, as mentioned. So no refitting is required, which is the benefit of, or the profit of using a permutation approach. But also, they mention in the work that they provide a partial control of type 1 error. And to better understand what they mean by partial control, I take the settings from me et al. And I've changed in the thesis the degree of correlation up to 0.5 and 0.8. So we have now more correlation between the different variables. And we can see that the blue one is the perfect method. It's no more like it doesn't control the type 1 error at a nominal rate of 5%, which explains why it is biased in also why it is biased in high correlation settings. To know the reason of this failure of controlling in high correlated settings, we take the distribution of importance scores of a non-significant variable, which should be Gaussian and centered around 0. But as we can see, it is non-Gaussian and not centered around 0. We won't talk about, in the following, we won't talk about the Gaussianality, but we will focus what is the reason of having this distribution not centered around 0. To simplify things, we suppose the linear case. So mu, the function that maps x to y, is equals to xw, so just the sum of it, with the weights, and mu hat x, xw hat. Xj, the variable of interest, has a correlation scheme with the remaining variables. We reconsider the same importance function, and we have epsilon I, the residuals of the prediction of the variable of the outcome y. And here, for the following, we consider just a null variable. And for a null variable, the weight is equal to 0, because it's null. We rewrite the importance score function in this format. And we can see that two of these terms are converging to 0 asymptotically. N-train is fixed, so the weights are fixed. But when n-test tends to infinity, these both terms, under the law of large numbers, they tend to their expected value, having 0, with the speed of 1 over square root of n-test, using the Berry-Essen theorem. Okay, so we have a null variable. The importance function should converge to 0, but we see that it's converging to a non-vanishing term, as we can see here. And having non-vanishing terms, it means we have a false positive. So instead of being detected as non-relevant, it's detected as being relevant. Okay, to sum up now the question or the challenge in this project, we want to find effectively the relevant variables for the prediction of a biomedical outcome. We are working with biomedical outcomes, while focusing on three main features. First, statistical error control. So we want to control the rate of true non-relevant variables detected as relevant. We want to watch for the situation in high correlation settings and also in high dimensional settings. What happens in these kind of settings. The current state of the art lacks a sensitive agnostic method with statistical guarantees. Permutation importance, as mentioned, it fails to control in high correlation settings. And local approach, the total removal of the variable of interest, is ineffective. So we move to my first contribution that I've presented in NeurIPS 2023, entitled Statistically Valid Variable Importance Assessment through Conditional Permutations. In other words, how can we apply the conditional schemes in order to better control the type 1 error in high correlated settings? Before jumping to our proposed solution, we start with a solution proposed also by Strobel et al. In their work. So we have here two variables, x1 and x2, for the prediction of the outcome. And as we can see, the samples can be categorized into two groups. We have, according to the variable of x2. They are fed into a random forest, having x2 the conditioning feature. So the samples are split between the leaves. And then in their work, we can say that they introduce the conditional sampling. And this conditional sampling is done by doing what we call group-based permutations. So instead of permuting all the columns of the variable of interest, they just permute the subgroups conditioned on the remaining variables. This approach solves the problem of permutation approach, but first, it's specific for a random forest learner. We want an agnostic tool, so we don't want any pre-assumptions on the used model. And with more variables, we have more subgroups, so it becomes computationally expensive. So we need also to control for time consumption. For our proposed solution, under the above setting, under what we already mentioned, and if mu hat, our estimator, is smooth in the vicinity of x, to consider the linearized assumption as before, the conditional permutation approach asymptotically controls the rate of type 1 error. What we mean by this proposition, here we introduce epsilon j. It is the residuals of predicting the variable of interest given the remaining variables. In other terms, we sample the variable of interest, not sampled from the same distribution, but from the conditional distribution over the remaining variables. And why we are doing this? Because the idea of the permutation is to break the relationship with the outcome. And the variable of interest contains two sorts of information: the information related to the outcome and to the remaining variables. So the idea is to keep the dependency with the remaining variables while breaking the relationship with the outcome. X hat j, it contains the information with the remaining variables. So as we can see, it is kept. And the residuals are permuted to break the relationship with the outcome. And mu hat is a non-linear Bayes learner. So under the smoothest assumption, it can be linearized. Taking the linearized assumption and the sampling of xj, and we recall that n train is fixed, so the weights again are fixed. We rewrite the importance function according to this format. And now we have all the terms are converging to 0. We don't have any non-vanishing terms anymore. And again, with the same speed using the Berry-Essen theorem. Vanishing terms for non-significant variables, it is a goal that we want to reach, and we control for type 1 error by the proposed solution. Now, the idea is to sample xj from the conditional distribution, but how did we implement it actually in our work? So we can see that we have our inputs, x and y. They both are fed to a training, according to the learner block, using n-train to a certain Bayes estimator. That's called, for example, a DNN or any other estimator. Then, once mu hat is trained, in the importance block, we have x divided between the remaining variables and the variable of interest. They are both fed here for a random forest. Actually, it can be any estimator, even any scikit-learn compatible estimator. And initially, here we had the DNN, but we wanted a model that, for the purpose of having the conditional probability and to speed things up, we chose a random forest, but we can choose anything else. We have the new sampled design matrix, and it is easy to, to follow the same path to compute the p-values. So the variable of interest is now substituted for a sampled and not a permuted version. So the same idea of keeping the dependency with the remaining variables. And any estimator can be used, but as mentioned, we chose random forest to speed things up. Here I show you the full path of going from the inputs to the new, let's say, new design matrix, and we will go step by step to see how we are doing this sampling step. Initially, we start as input with the remaining variables and as output with a variable of interest. Both are fed to a lean random forest, and we compute the predicted version of the variable of interest. Then, by subtracting from the ground truth, we have the residuals. We shuffle B times to have B versions of these residuals. We add the residuals with the predicted version to have the new sampled variable of interest, and we have now B versions of the design matrix. So these sampled versions using the conditional permutation and to obtain statistical evidence as before. The question is, did this proposed solution fix the problem in high correlation settings? To answer, we reconsider the simulation from Mi et al., but now we include the new approach. Here we can see that the orange one is the method from Mi et al., where they deploy the permutation approach, and the blue one we are using we use our proposed solution. And we should mention that, okay, we have here AUC and type 1 error, but it's not the usual metrics. Here the problem is now a binary classification problem of classifying the variables between being relevant or not relevant. It's not related to the outcome anymore. So AUC, it's related to the correct significant variables ordering. In other terms, it reflects the sensitivity of the method to order significant variables. And the type 1 error is the rate of non-significant variables detected as significant. In terms of AUC score in blue, we can see that the new approach preserved the same performance compared to the permutation approach. So we are using the same base learner of DNN with both approaches, the conditional and the permutation. On the left side, in terms of type 1 error, the orange, as we mentioned earlier, it doesn't control the type 1 error in high correlated settings, but the blue one, our proposed solution, it controls even in high correlated settings going up to 0.8, which is the goal we want to achieve. Now, we compare our proposed solution with the state-of-the-art methods for variable importance. But these methods are published in different domains, so they are not systematically comparable or compared. Here we create an empirical benchmark by gathering all the state-of-the-art methods for variable importance, and we will explain each one. So marginal, it's the marginal, it's just the baseline. It's using a marginal association between each variable and the outcome, and computing p-values using the F-test. D0CRT, it's the conditional randomization test introduced by Candice et al., using the distillation approach to make it faster. Conditional random forest, it's the proposed solution by Strobel et al. Lazy variable importance, they use the principle of loco, leaving one covariate out, but on DNN learners. And with DNN learner, it is it costs to retrain the model, so they are using a linear approximation for the retraining process. CPI knockoff, it is similar to our approach, but instead of sampling, as we mentioned, they are using knockoffs. And knockoffs, they are a family of random variables mimicking the statistical properties of the original data, but they are independent of the outcome given the original variables. So they have two properties. And the problem with such method is related to the generation process of the knockoffs, because it should be Gaussian or not Gaussian. Then CPI-RF, as mentioned, our tool is model agnostic, so we can use it with any base learner. We use it with random forest and with a DNN. And PermFit, it's the DNN along with the permutation approach. Again, the performance is measured using AUC score and type 1 error. For the scenarios, we start with a simple linear model. Then we add a layer of nonlinearity with a radio function. We have a case of interactions only, so we keep only the interactions and we remove the main effects. And at the end, we have the most realistic problem having main effects and interactions, which can mimic the real cases. And also, we compare with a classification case. In terms of results, we see that 5 out of these methods, they control the type 1 error at the nominal rate of 5%. But again, we want also not just controlling, but we want a sensitive method. So we want the method achieving the highest ABC score, and it is based on using DNN-based learners. Now we compare refitting the local idea with a conditional generation, the CPI idea. And to have a fair comparison, the local and CPI are both using the same DNN architecture. We see that they both control the type 1 error. There is maybe a slight difference in the performance, but especially they control the type 1 error. Also, this we compare in high correlation settings. But in terms of time cost, the refitting method, it is much higher than the conditional generation, which so we can say that our method is not expensive, and also it achieves the control of type 1 error in high correlated settings. Now, we talk about the limitations of the conditional inference. So it is good, it controls the type 1 error, it is not expensive, but also it has a limitation. We have here an example of x1 and x2, two extremely correlated variables used for the prediction of the outcome, as mentioned. If x1 is given, all the information from x2, it is contained in x1. So x2 is considered as not important. And also, if x2 is given, x1 is considered as not important. It means we have a mutual cancellation of the conditional importance of both variables. So neither of the variables is important. There is a need to consider them jointly. To understand what's happening empirically, we take an example of two exact replicas of the same vector, and both are taking part in the prediction. So x1 and x2, they are both the same vector or attribute, and using CPI, they should both be detected as relevant. But as we can see, they are below the nominal rate, the red line, so they are both canceling the importance of each other. So if we have this problem, we don't have any important variables, despite the fact that both took part in the prediction of the outcome. Also, what is the situation in high-dimensional settings? So we mentioned the control in high correlation settings, but also we have high-dimensional settings. How the proposed solution behaves in high-dimensional settings. If we take an example of Harvard-Oxford Atlas parcellation, we see a parcellation of different brain regions. We have a lot of brain regions, and if we take more atlases, we have also more regions. With higher number of regions, we have more iterations, and we want to iterate over each single level. So it's very expensive. The method becomes expensive. How can we solve the problem in this limitation and the problem in high-dimensional settings? We move to my second contribution that I presented in AAAI early this year, 2024. It's entitled Variable Importance in High-Dimensional Settings Requires Grouping. So now the work was done on the single level, and now we move to the group level. To recall the structure, we have X and Y, our inputs, the learner block, containing the base estimator, performing inference on the data, the importance block, sampling the variable, or now the group of interest. There is now the keyword of group of interest, so it's a group of variables, not just one variable. And any scikit-learn compatible learners can be used, so it's for the wide community to test it, even with their own models. For the importance block, traditionally, the easiest solution to apply for grouping is to do what we call it the joint permutation. So we permute all the variables of the group simultaneously. On the other side, if we want to control for the group of interest, we apply the conditional approach as mentioned earlier. Before going to the learner block, let me introduce a little bit the stacking approach, which we kind of use in our work. So Wolpert et al., he introduced the idea of stacking to enhance predictions by stacking multiple prediction models. We see that we have the data, we have multiple base classifiers going from 1 to n. They apply these base classifiers on the data using a cross-fitting process. We have the predictions. These predictions are stacked and fed to a meta classifier. In the next years, in the work by Liam et al. Or Rahim et al., instead of applying different classifiers on the same data, we see that the data is now split into group of variables or input domains. If you want, for example, to have multiple brain modalities in your work instead of just one, and they apply the same Bayes estimator on the different groups. We have, again, the predictions. The predictions are stacked and fed to the meta classifier. This stacking solution is an external solution. So we do the stacking before, and then we stack to the meta classifier. The question is how we can make it an internal solution, because we use a DNN-based learner as mentioned. So with a DNN learner, we can expand the architecture to incorporate a new sublinear layer without activation. So the input X is now divided between G1 to GK, the different groups. These groups are projected linearly to a low dimensional space. By default, it's 1 neuron, but it can be more if we want to bring more information from the groups. And instead of having now groups with high cardinality, we have a low cardinality or even one. Like it's kind of we summarize the information from the group into one or multiple neurons. Here we compare the block-based BCPI, the block-based conditional permutation importance, along with state-of-the-art methods for a group variable importance. And the literature for single-level variable importance, it's much they have more methods than the group level. Okay, so on the left side we have marginal, the baseline, using now a marginal association between the group of interest instead of the variable of interest. BCPI RF using a random forest-based learner. BPI DNN, we deploy the permutation, the joint permutation of the different variables. And BCPI DNN, it's the proposed solution, the BCPI with a DNN-based learner. On the left side, we have the method that provide statistical evidence in terms of p-values, but also we have on the right side some state-of-the-art methods without p-values. We have GPFI, it stands for grouped permutation feature importance. So here it's the same for joint permutation, but without conditional, without computing p-values. Group out permutation feature importance, instead of shuffling just the group of interest, they shuffle all the groups instead of the group of, except for the group of interest. And they compare it to the initially established data set. Logi, introduced before, so we have one group for the estimation. And logo, they keep all the groups, and it's like a generalization for loco. Instead of removing one variable, they remove the whole group. We see that BCPI DNN and BCPI RF, they both control the type 1 error, even in high correlation settings. And again, using the DNN learner, we achieve the highest AUC score. So more sensitive method requires a DNN-based learner. Now, we introduce the internal stacking, the idea of linear projecting the groups into a low-dimensional space. But what is the impact actually on the performance? Here we compare both stacking and non-stacking on the same prediction problem, we can see that both they achieve the same performance in terms of AUC score, type 1 error, or even power. But if we go to the time consumption, we see that the main benefit of stacking is accelerating. It achieves the same performance, but it's accelerating the computation at least twice. And if we have groups with with more cardinality, so more number of variables, the stacking becomes more and more essential for the computation. Now, BCPI is the framework for variable importance with statistical guarantees for both single and group levels. And we want to explore the behavior of the method, or even we want to revisit some machine learning applied research where they didn't apply the controlled version, and we want to see what is the impact, what is the potential impact of having this method in across neuroimaging applications. So this is the work in preparation entitled Conditional Permutation Algorithms for Interpretable Machine Learning in Neuroimaging. We focus on neuroimaging. Because we talk about neuroimaging, we start by introducing a bit the different brain imaging modalities. So the brain, it has different sources of data. We can extract a lot of sources of data depending on the modality we apply. We have, for example, MRI. It scans for the anatomical structure of the brain. We have DMRI, the diffusion MRI, related to the water diffusion in the brain tissues, and it quantifies the anatomical brain connectivity. We can move to the EEG. It measures the electrophysiological brain activity by detecting changes in electrical potential in the brain. And we have fMRI. Instead of fMRI, it measures the brain connectivity by detecting changes in the blood level of blood oxygenation. So how can we use the different sources of information to answer biomedical questions? We see in the following. The first experiment, it's about biomedical outcome prediction in UK Biobank. We introduced UK Biobank, a large cohort study, and the experiment here reanalyzes the work by Dadi et al. It means we want to find the importance of fMRI, DMRI introduced, fMRI, structural MRI, standing for also MRI, and sociodemographics on the proxy measure. So we go back to answer the initial question, how we have now a precise understanding of the variable's importance. And the challenge, as mentioned, they don't have any controlled statistical proof. They don't have a statistical evidence of their work or for their insights. We start by age prediction in UK Biobank using the single level variables. We see here the light orange standing for variables detected as non-important by both. So in fact, we compare here both approaches, the standard permutation and the conditional permutation for the prediction problem. So the light orange standing for the variables detected as non-important by both approaches. Light blue, important, detected as relevant by both approaches. Dark orange, detected as relevant just by PermFit, so by the permutation approach. And the dark blue, we have it here, detected the relevant variables detected by just the conditional approach. On the right side, using just the low correlated social variables, we see more light color regions. So we can say that there is highest agreement in rankings is expected between both approaches because the permutation approach is biased in high correlation settings, but it's still valid in low correlation settings. But on the left side, we see more dark regions, dark color regions. So we see a deviation now, a divergence, in fact, in rankings is expected because integrating the controlled approach in high correlation settings will have different judgment, let's say, about the rankings of the different input features. We move now to the group level. Instead of having all the variables of the different sources, we have now groups of variables. The green one standing for sociodemographics, and the blue ones are measures extracted from the brain imaging variables. On the left side, we compute the degree of significance of the different groups. Again, we are still comparing both CPI and perfect. And we can see that when we control at a p-value of 0.1%, so we are now at 0.1%, we need a combination of sociodemographics and brain imaging variables to predict the age. So if we go back to the question, brain imaging variables, do they carry more unique information on top of sociodemographics? We can see that yes, they bring more information. But the question now is, we have selected groups, how we can know that these groups are indeed relevant or not. On the right side, once we perform this variable importance selection of groups, we do a performance check. We have the selection threshold, so we have all the groups versus removing the non-relevant groups at 5% and the non-relevant groups at 0.1%. And we can see that the performance is preserved across the different scenarios. So we can say that these additional groups they don't bring any additional unique information for the prediction. The third part, we talked about age, and we saw that here for age, connectivity measures extracted from DMRI and structural MRI, they take part in the prediction process for age. But what if we want to expand it to other proxy measures? For fluid intelligence, we can see that connectivity and SMRI, they are the only parts of the brain variables important for predicting fluid intelligence. Next, for sure, for sociodemographics. And for neuroticism, brain variables, they don't bring any additional information for the prediction. So we can say that brain imaging variables, they bring little information on psychological constructs, talking about neuroticism and fluid intelligence, because for age, they take part. So here we have heterogeneous sources of data, brain imaging variables, and sociodemographics. We now move in the next experiment to work with brain multi-model brain modalities, again for prediction models. So first, we introduce CAMCAN, the Cambridge Center of Aging and Neuroscience. It's a collaborative research project encompassing MEG, fMRI, and anatomical MRI for around 600 individuals. Here we have, in terms of variables, around 40,000 variables. So there is a need for stacking that we introduced earlier, the internal stacking process. In this experiment, we reanalyzed the work by Ingeman et al. To identify the most informative electrophysiological markers of aging. It means how we can understand age prediction in CAMCAN among fMRI, MRI, and MEG. So now we just have multimodal brain modalities. And the challenge, why did we go to this axe? Because in their work, they employ just the traditional permutation-based approach. And as mentioned, it is a non-controlled detection in high correlated settings when talking about brain settings, brain environment. On the left side, we compare each modality as a whole modality, so as a whole group. And on the right side, each modality is divided. fMRI is not divided, but MRI and MEG is divided into submodalities. We see that the conditional, the blue one, so the blue one standing for the conditional approach, it reflects the significance of MRI for predicting age in CAMCAN. MRI is also relevant as a whole modality, but in terms of submodalities, MRI area is canceled by both approaches. So we see that fMRI and MRI first are relevant for age prediction. In MEG, as a whole modality, MEG is important, is relevant for age prediction. But if we go to the submodalities, we see that the blue one, the conditional approach, it cancels the importance or the significance of the different submodalities, because the correlation between the frequency bands make it hard to know which one is important. So there's a degree of correlation between the frequency bands, or it's like distributed between the different frequency bands. We talked about heterogeneous sources of data, about multimodal brain modalities, Now we will talk about how we can use EEG signals. So we go like inside EEG signals using the frequency bands to answer also another question. We'll see what is the question here. So first, Lemon dataset, it incorporates resting state EEG from around 200 individuals. And the idea here that the status of the eyes, more like closing the eyes, it increases the frequencies between 8 and 12 hertz. It is known as the Berger effect. And between 8 and 12 hertz, standing for alpha band. Because we are working, or we work here with EEG signals, we apply the Riemannian geometry or source power commodulation, SPOC. Why? To derive information from EEG signals. So we create representations that effectively capture brain activity. And why? Because both approaches are able to unmix the EEG signals. The EEG signals are a mixing of sources in the brain, so they are effectively important to unmix these signals for the sources in the brain. And we apply, or we use the filter banks in Sabah et al.'s work. They applied the highly effective strategies using either, so the Riemannian geometry, against using a Riemannian manifold. Source power commodulation is using just an Euclidean space. And the challenge, so the alpha, it's important for determining the status of the eyes, but can we have like more scientific discoveries, more frequency bands that are important or not for determining the status of the eyes? We see here that the model, according to the conditional approach, again in blue, it doesn't choose just the alpha band, but it chooses also the low frequencies, low delta and theta, and it can be related to low energy or low frequency related to the movement of the eyes. And the beta band contributions are clearly ruled out, not by both approaches, but only by the conditional approach. So here we can say that we have a new discoveries. Not just the alpha band is related to the status of the eyes, but we have the low frequencies, and the beta bands are not taking part in, they don't take part in this prediction. To summarize what we talked about in this presentation. So first, permutation importance, it works in the black box settings, but is misleading for correlated data. It creates big significant variables. The conditional scheme CPI controls the type 1 error even in high correlation settings. BCPI provides an indicator of significance, so it's a framework for variable importance under statistical guarantees with a reduced computation time. Why? Because we have now the internal stacking, maintaining the same performance while providing important time savings. And for sure, we should mention that BCPI controls type 1 error in both high correlation and high dimensional settings. Deep learning models are the most reliable methods. They achieve the highest AUC score. So if we want a sensitive method, we are talking about the use of DNN learners, but we should pay attention to the number of samples we have in our data. Combining brain and sociodemographic data is efficient for the prediction of proxy measures like mentioning age, fluid intelligence, and neuroticism, and also with a reduced number of variables, as we mentioned, by removing the non-relevant variables. Multi-brain imaging modalities are relevant for subject-level age prediction. And finally, beta band contributions are clearly ruled out by the conditional approach. So if we want the significant frequencies for determining the status of the eyes, the beta bands are not the choice if we want to next to have an idea about study design. As future directions for internal stacking, we use the linear projections, but we want to understand what is the potential of having nonlinear projections. To study the impact of missing and low values on the accuracy, also across different group definitions, to extend the application to more biomedical outcomes beyond just the proxy measures of mental health, and to integrate the method with clinical trials, talking about treatment effect estimation, for example. One last thing, as a limitation, we see in the work that the explained variables of Y is not additively decomposed into the importance of the input features, which is a feature for Shapley values. But Shapley values, they are hard to compute, and they do not provide p-values. So maybe there is a way to merge both works. These are the references for the work. There's a lot. Finally, one last word. I want to thank my team for a wonderful journey of 3 years and a half. These are our retreats, our annual retreats, where we have scientific projects and fruitful discussions. And I want to use a quote by Ellen Keller saying, "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much." And thanks for your attention.
Thank you. We'll now start the questions. So we can start with the reviewers of your PhD manuscript. So starting with Anna Boulestex, who is a professor at Munich University. So Anna, if you can hear us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me as well?
Yeah, perfect. Maybe
Okay.
you can use that. Is it possible to see Anna?
I was
Okay.
doing it.
Ah.
Okay.
So maybe go back to the slides.
Okay. Sorry. I will. Okay. I'll try to do something else. And I will add.
Is it okay, Anna?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Okay.
The floor.
Yeah, then thank you very much for this nice presentation. So I really read your work with much interest. I think this is a really important topic and really nice method to to provide this variable importance assessment with taking while taking into account statistical significance. So I really appreciated to read about this. And so I have a couple of questions on different aspects of your work. And I will start with what I call my standard question, because I quite often ask this question, and I mean it's also here very relevant to your work. So you compared a lot of methods in your thesis. You did some benchmarking of a high number of methods, and my question is, how about neutrality of the comparison? I mean, is there the possibility that some methods are advantaged over others due to the way the data was selected or generated? So that would be my first question. Did you think about these aspects? How to make sure that the comparison is really fair in the way it is designed?
In fact, to answer this, sorry.
Let me just go to that. Okay. So first, as I mentioned, we want to benchmark the methods using the same empirical benchmark. But also to answer your question, we take our proposed solution and put it in the same settings of permutation approach to make sure that we are not biased in the selection of the scenarios for the benchmark. So to validate one of the examples, we use it with the same settings from EL, not just our settings. As I mentioned, when I show that we control better than the permutation approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you for this answer. So a question that is a little bit related to that, actually, when you say, okay, we compared the method based on the same settings, but actually, I think the methods do not really consider the same null hypothesis when they're assessing significance. Well, significance refers somehow to some null hypothesis that is either true or false. Of course, we don't know whether it's true or false in practice, so do the different methods really consider the same null hypothesis, the same underlying null hypothesis, or is the null hypothesis actually always cleanly defined? Because I feel that some methods may be a little bit sloppy with respect to definition of what is actually being tested. So what is your
Yeah, in fact, the method I've presented in the benchmark, to have a fair comparison, we are using the p-values. So all the methods are providing statistical guarantees in terms of p-values, and to have the same null hypothesis of comparing one input feature
being relevant or not.
But how would you formalize this in a mathematical way? I mean, being relevant, I mean, it's understandable. I mean, everybody understands what it means, but in a mathematical formalization.
It's because the methods used are based on the removal-based approaches, and they apply one example, either total remove or shuffling at a time. So each time we just compare one input feature being relevant or not. So this validates the idea of the null hypothesis.
Okay, but shuffling or removing, the null hypotheses are different, right? In the shuffling framework and in the removing.
In fact, no, I think it is the same, but with different applications. So the same idea of we are iterating each time on one input feature or on a group, but the application of either using shuffling or total removing is different.
Okay, because when I'm thinking, I mean, as a statistician, of course, I think of the linear model as a kind of basis method, and I would say for the linear model, removing and shuffling would be actually different null hypotheses. While removing would be just the feature is not at all in the assumed model, and shuffling would be like it's there in the model, but with a coefficient that is that is 0.
In fact, I presented the marginal, the baseline. The marginal, it's using like a leave one covariate in. So we have just one input feature versus the outcome. Mm-hmm. But it is following the same null hypothesis of computing the importance for each input feature. Okay. So we try to have the fair comparison of the null hypothesis.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you. Maybe another question, which is also a little bit related to this comparison of the shuffling and removing approach. I mean, you also presented some concrete examples, some applications, and what do you think? What are the most common? What is the most common interest of applicants? Are they really interested in the shuffling approach or in the removing approach in practice? I mean, do they really want? Do they rather want to know? Okay, we have this model, and we are interested to know how much this group of variable contributes, or do they rather want to know? I mean, whether it would be possible to do as well without the group of variables. As with the group of variables, so what is there? I mean, there may be the different perspectives, but what is your experience? What is most important in practice?
I think because we provide the tool that can able to handle the high correlation and the high dimensional, but we didn't remove the impact of other methods, as we see that also other methods are still controlling. So it's depending more on the choice. For example, if you have a DNN, you have a big complex architecture, you can go to apply the removal base, but it will be super expensive in terms of retraining the model. You can go to the lazy VI. It's they are doing a sort of linear approximation, and you can go to the shuffling. So the shuffling, it's I think the easiest way to have controlled insights.
Okay, but so but my question was maybe more focused on what the applicants are interested in. I mean, what is feasible is kind of another question, or what is technically easy or not is another type of question. But my question is more what is interesting, what is relevant clinically, for example, for the substantive scientists or for the clinicians or the people applying the model at the end.
Okay, I think it depends on two things. First, on the scientific discovery. So you have now statistical proof of your insights. So for the applicants, they, like mentioned before, we have now insights for which sources are, which small parts are, they take part in the prediction. But also for the next steps, we keep the same performance with a reduced number of variables. So for the study design later, we can focus on, for example, which electrodes we want to put on the brain, which sources we want to focus on more. So it is the first, it's just scientific discovery, but I think the next steps are they have more impact for clinical trials.
Okay, thank you. If I have time, I will have maybe a last question. Is it okay, or should I pass?
Yes, okay. You can continue.
Thank you. Okay, so my last question will be specifically on the random forest method. I mean, there was a study quite a long time ago, 2007, also by Caroline Strobel, but not the same one, not the same paper as the 2008 paper on conditional variable importance. So in the 2007 paper, what they show is that the classical random forest algorithm is biased in variable selection, which means that some variables of some types are more often selected for splitting than variables of other types, independently of their information content for the prediction problem. So more specifically, we have shown that variables with many candidate splits are more often selected than those with a few splits. For example, a binary variable would have only one possible split. And so this bias actually affects the whole tree and the whole forest, and also the variable importance measures. And I was wondering whether this is an issue. I mean, well, in cases where you have only continuous variables, I would guess this is not so much of an issue. But if you have also other types of variable, this may become relevant. So have you experience on this?
Actually, no. But if we want to tackle this work, we can use some variants. So instead of leaving the trees going to a certain depth, we can use a variant like BART, where they use just some weak trees achieving the same performance. So we can use some alternatives to keep out this bias. If
which variant? Yeah. Yeah. So which variant do you mean exactly?
It's called BART, Bayesian additive regression trees.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
They just keep the trees, small trees, instead of leaving the trees going to growing to a depth, more depth, having more depth.
And does this address the bias in variable selection, or?
According to the work, they tackle the problem of bias compared to random forest. But as I mentioned, we wanted just a simple model, so we used random forest. But we also kept the space for any other symmetry if you want to compare better.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you very much. That's all for my part. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne-Laure. So we are now listening to Moritz Grosswentrup, a professor at University of Vienna. So Moritz, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you well. Can you hear me well too?
Yeah, perfect.
Good, wonderful. Well, then also, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity to read this really interesting thesis and for attending this defense. I very much enjoyed your presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Then I have several questions that do overlap with Anne-Laure's questions, but I will maybe ask them from a little bit of a different perspective. So I hope this will be illuminating for both of us. So first of all, I would like to go back to the null hypothesis that you're really testing, because that was not entirely clear to me either. Can you express this null hypothesis as some form of independence relationship or conditional independence relationship between the variables that you're considering?
Yeah. Yes. So the null hypothesis, it is to find if one input feature is important given. So the null hypothesis, if the input feature is independent of the outcome given the remaining variables, if we want to formulate it as a conditional.
Okay, but wouldn't that imply that then you are making a statement about the observed samples, like Y being independent of X, or Y and X being independent conditional on the remaining features? And how does the how does the distinction between observed samples and manipulations of the input to your classifier factor into that?
Because the idea is we in the variable of interest we have the two informations, the one related to the remaining variables and the one related to the outcome. And the idea of the permutation is to break the relationship with the outcome. But when just doing the simple permutation, the standard one, we are also breaking the relationship with the remaining variables, which should be, we assume that we should keep it, not break it also.
Mm-hmm.
So,
oh, sorry, please go on.
So just we did this sampling of the conditional distribution.
When you talk about the outcome, do you mean the actual outcome Y that you observed, or the outcome of the model? Let's call it Y hat.
No, we actually mean the Y, the observed. So the idea that the model is fitted initially with a learner block, if I maybe go. So the idea is in the learner block, we use X and Y to fit the mu hat. And then we compute the importance scores, but we also are still based on the use of the base learner. So we have two different estimators. One using as outcome the actual outcome of the prediction problem, the Y, and one is using each time the variable of interest.
But when you formulate your null hypothesis and you want to make a statement about variable importance, meaning that a variable affects the predictions that you make, wouldn't you have to formulate your null hypothesis using Y hat, the outcome of your predictor, not the variable Y, the true outcome that you observed?
Exactly. If I go back a little bit to, if I go back to the same importance score function introduced by me et al., instead of having, like, we see the importance at the difference of the mean squared error before and after. So we are keeping the same flow, but instead of doing this total permutation, we just do the sampling, the conditional sampling. So we are in the same spirit of the permutation, but we are correcting using the conditional sampling.
To me, this seems a little bit as if we are defining the concept of interest as the one that we happen to estimate with whatever cost function we're using. And somehow I'm a little bit lost in kind of, I would have suspected that defining what variable importance means in the first place and then finding a proper scheme or test statistic to test that, somehow I'm not sure I understand that entirely here. So somehow to me, the concept of variable importance appears a bit more intricate as one might think. So what exactly does variable importance actually mean?
Okay, so here, if I want to go concretely more about the definition, it will be using the conditional, like at first, it is the null hypothesis of one input feature being independent of the outcome. So it's not taking part in the prediction of the outcome. If I want to go to the conditional correction, it will be given the remaining variables. And given the remaining variable, it solves the problem with the permutation. So we are keeping the same null hypothesis.
Let me give you one simple example, yeah, and I'd be curious to hear what sort of variable importance you would like to see in that example. So we know that socioeconomic status has an effect on whether people are likely to smoke or not, and the probability of smoking has an effect on the probability of having cancer. Yeah? And so there's certainly a correlation between socioeconomic status and the probability of cancer, and there's a correlation between smoking and the probability of having cancer. And now, if you train a model on this, then what you would probably see is that you would only find a relationship between the model would only use the probability of smoking, whether the subject is smoking or not, because that is the Markov blanket in this example of the be predicted variable. And then in this case, the socioeconomic status would not be used by the model, would not be important. But clearly it's important in the data generating process sense that if you change the socio-demographic status, that has an effect on whether you get cancer or not. So would you want both of these features here to be important variables or not? And what I'm trying to get at here is, do you want to learn something about your model, or do you want to learn something about your data generating process?
In fact, if I go back to your example, if the smoking status, it's highly correlated with the probability of cancer, with one solution is to keep it out of the data set and to keep just the first data. Mm-hmm. And the idea is we are not tackling the data generating process. We are more like understanding the behavior of one model based on the inputs and the outputs. So we're more like what will have which input features they have an impact on the black box model.
Okay,
but we didn't down to data generating process.
Yeah, thank you. Then staying on this slide, because I wanted to go back to this slide anyhow, you have introduced one correlation scheme here where the variables are correlated due to some latent confounder, right? That is this random vector. But there are different ways in which correlations can arise. And in the example that I just gave, the correlations came about by a direct causal relationship between two variables in your inputs, in your feature space.
Yes.
Did you distinguish this? And do you also have kind of the limitations of, or have you studied the limitations of ordinary permutation approaches when correlations come about due to different causal relations?
No. The aim here was just to present that if you have a sort of scheme correlation between the variable of interest and the remaining variables, we will have a non-vanishing term. So we have like one example of why the permutation is biased.
But in this particular case here, right, you cannot remove that bias by conditioning because it's a latent variable that you haven't observed. But in the example that I gave before, you do have kind of the source of the correlation between variables in your data set as well. And can you discuss a little bit whether that might change the outcome?
Okay, I think okay, so I think if we want to have a correlation like in the example we've provided, but here, according to the example, we should take the confounding feature to consideration. So like actually, I don't think it will have like a difference in the outcome. But
let me maybe try it with another example that I'm curious about.
Yeah.
So imagine in the brain imaging, to make it a little bit more more intuitive, you can in principle predict behavior from brain activity, or you can predict a stimuli from brain activity. Right? Yes. And it's clear that in the one case you're predicting what causes your behavior, in the other case it's clear that you're kind of predicting the cause of the brain activity when you're trying to reconstruct the stimuli. Do you think these perturbation-based methods, would they deliver different results based on whether you are kind of in this causal or anti-causal prediction task? And in particular then for the brain age example, it wasn't entirely clear to me. Do you think that brain age would be a cause of the features that you observe of the neuronal activity, or would neuronal activity be cause of the brain age? So
in fact,
elaborate on that a little bit.
Okay. In fact, I think because usually when we apply the permutation or the conditional, we are using on all the remaining features. But also one key feature that we can apply is to do what we say like a relative importance. So instead of doing a conditional on all the remaining, we do just on a group of features. So this is what this can help us to tackle the problem you mentioned.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe going to this relative importance a little bit, and I guess there's a relationship to the block-wise importance or the grouping of variables that you have. It wasn't, again, statistically not entirely clear to me what kind of an ideal grouping would be. So when, from a statistical perspective, would you like to group variables into one group? What statistical relationships should hold between them?
Okay, so initially, if we want to work with groups, we are considering the knowledge-driven groups. So we have some experts who already group the variables. If not, we can, the initial idea is to do some sort of clustering, for example, hierarchical clustering, to keep the variables with the highest correlation inside one group. But like I mentioned in the future directions, that's a future direction, we want to go across different group definitions to find the ideal case.
What does ideal mean, statistically speaking?
Statistically, it is to have, as an example, to have for example, one important variable per group, and to be able to detect in fact, it depends more on the definition of the group. So how you define your group as important, it depends on having most of the variables are important or one representative. But like talking about an ideal case, I don't know if it exists, but we have different definitions.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Then I would kind of move on again to the other question that Anne-Laure asked, again, maybe from a somewhat different perspective. Anne-Laure asked about what users are interested in. And to me, it sometimes seems that variable importance is kind of considered an important problem in its own right. And if you can solve variable importance, then you're happy. But to me, the really relevant question then is, what can I do with that? In which settings can I make meaningful, interesting decisions based on variable importance? So would you have some applications? And I think you briefly mentioned treatment effect estimation, for instance. But I'm not entirely convinced that a variable that is important is hence also relevant for treatment effect estimation. Or maybe can you elaborate a little bit? In which settings is variable importance a useful concept to do something better? And what would that be?
In fact, it's okay. I will. We have here the example of the parcellation of the brain that I showed, and here we said that we want to capture the importance or the significance of each brain region. But if we want to go more to the clinical side, when talking, for example, about EEG, and we have the electrodes put on the scalp. We have a lot of electrodes, and we don't know where to focus exactly, which electrodes are more informative. So by doing the variable importance, first to discover which ones are important. So I think it can help us to control the risk which electrodes, which positions on the brain we can put the electrodes to better to have a better prediction from the signals.
So that would, in a sense, mean that we would hope that with variable importance we can train better classifiers in the future. Or somehow
yes, for study designs.
Yes. So do you see any way, extrapolating into future work, how this could be made more rigorous? How could variable importance metrics reduce the sample complexity of hypothesis classes?
I think the simplest example that I've shown here is to try to test. So if we have the electrodes that are the most informative, and we do some extra tests using the one generated with the variable importance, we can validate our statement about like to test it in clinical trials.
Okay, and now with brain age, do you suspect that these neuronal features that you measure are actually causal for brain age, or is age something that is causal for whatever you measure there? Because in terms of clinical trials, that would be rather relevant, right? Whether you are then manipulating effects or causes of what you are actually measuring, or what you want to predict.
No, I think according to what we've worked on, it is more like age is caused by the, so it is more related to the different parts of the brain that we want to tackle. But also, what I didn't mention that one good feedback that if we have a big group of, saying, connectivity, the group with the highest number of variables, it is ruled out by the conditional approach, and we are keeping the same performance. So I think it helps in the future to better understand which brain modalities to focus on if we want to answer, for example, brain age. Okay,
thank you. Then I would have two more questions, but please do interrupt me as head of the committee if I'm taking too much time here. I would have one very simple question. You mentioned that the complexity of your CPI-DNN approach is linear in the samples and quadratic in the variables. What about the competing methods? What is their computational complexity?
In fact, in the thesis we have a comparison between the time computation of different methods, and CPI-DNN it's ranked in top. So it is like almost quadratic, but it's better than the other alternative. Especially, like I showed, the idea of loco with DNN. So retraining a DNN, it's costing more time than shuffling.
Can you give that in big O notation, the competing methods?
Maybe loco can go to cubic, I think.
Okay, thank you. And then I would have one final question before I then pass on. and that that refers to the interpretability for non-experts in the field. And I would like to hear your opinion there. I have a bit of a feeling that current interpretation methods are developed by machine learners for machine learners. But I suspect if these methods are going to be deployed in clinical settings, it won't be expert machine learners who interpret these outcomes. It will be, say, radiologists who have to make treatment decisions. And do you think these methods that are currently being developed by you and others in the field, are they useful for users of these systems in the future? Or what would we need to make these systems applicable or usable by non-machine learning experts?
In fact, the aim of this project was to have this tool that's providing scientific discovery to have the next step for study design. So I think yes, but what is missing is to test it in clinical trials, just to be like even like we have statistical proof, but we still missing like some empirical or more like real results about the efficiency of the method. But yes, this I think will have a bright future for clinical trials. It will be even it can replace some of the tests if we don't want to, or it can bring us more data, even if we understand going beyond the data generating process later.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe I would allow myself one very final question, because that's one that I always like to ask in the end. Now that you're done with your PhD and knowing all that you now know, what would you have done differently?
What I have done different? Maybe I will have the time to go to the next step of to see how this will have an impact on the decision-making processes or on the study design, not just limit myself to the statistical evidence.
Okay.
Like it's giving us an overview of the impact, but I think the next step, it's the most important for the community also.
Yeah, thank you very much for all the answers. I will pass on.
Thank you, Moritz. Also, we are now listening to Sylvain Chevalier, professor at Université Paris.
So thank you very much. It was a real pleasure to read your manuscript. The first part was very, very interesting, giving a very clear overview. And the experiments are also very thrilling. So to go a little bit in the line of the question that Moritz asked, I was wondering on the block CPI part.
Okay.
Right now, yeah, you are using different classifiers.
Yes.
You tried.
No. In fact, no. If we are using the DNN, we are using.
Yeah, only one.
Yeah, so the DNN expanded with the other sublinear layers.
Okay. And did you try other classifiers?
Yes, we tried. Well, if we want to try a simple or classical method, we want to use what we call the leave one group out. So we want to apply the cross-fitting, because it's an internal solution, but it needs like an additional step beyond just changing the architecture.
And what are your recommendations regarding the selection of such classifier? Maybe regarding robustness to injection, or
I think if someone wants to use DNN, we want more samples, because DNN wants more samples to copy the data. So I think the other choice is to go into more simple nonlinear methods like random forest, or even other variants having this robust specialty. Like I mentioned BART, but also there is also like gradient boosting and other extension.
Yeah, boosting is really nice. Nice way to go there. And you also mentioned that you were using only the linear projection in the
yes.
Yeah, did you consider using non-linear approaches?
In fact, it is one of the future directions, but it is we didn't do it because we wanted to have a big benchmark because we have multiple activations. So we have a review, tangent, a sigmoid. We don't have which activation. It's providing more information. So we didn't go this far, but I think it is easy to be done. And also, I think it can bring more information if the non-linearity between the data is there is more non-linearity in the group.
Yes, it was one of my questions, and that was a question about the relation that could exist within a group of variables that you are observing. And I was wondering, did you so you mentioned as future work to maybe define different way for grouping variable. Hierarchy or graph of relation one of the things you want to explore?
More like we could test because here we considered one group being important, having most of the representatives being important, like the values inside the group. But also we can go to a more let's say more strict definition of having just one representative. So if you have one variable per group is important, the method can detect it being important or not, which I think it's also one real case of having one important per group. So also we have, I think, different group definitions. We can't limit ourselves to one definition, and we should go like test all the possible definitions to see if can be expanded to the definition.
Because I was thinking especially of the relation within one group, because it's nice to select one variable to keep as a representative variable, but it could also be very interesting to get deeper into that group to see the relation.
Yeah. In fact, also, so actually here in the benchmark, we have inside one group, we have like a sort of block-based correlation between the variables, and also we have a correlation between the groups. So I think, yes, you are right in terms of we can start with a group to have like an idea which groups are important, and then we can go to the single level and within the same group to explore which variables are indeed important or not. Yeah. I think it's a good workflow to start with, and also it's more.
Do you think it will be possible to uncover those?
I think, yeah.
Okay. So after this question, I have more question on the last part of your talk on the neural imaging application.
Okay.
Yeah, especially I was wondering on slide 39 when you rank, you speak about the different
yes.
rank. Did you compare explicitly the rank of the variable, or just was it just are they considered as relevant or not? Did you find any difference in the rank?
No. Here ranking is more like about being relevant or not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So just if they have the rankings are convergent to the same idea of having the same in like parts of classification, or as in the brain there is a divergence.
And did you study the internal ranking of each method?
No. Because what we wanted to, if we want to have a fair comparison, we are aiming to compare the p-values, and by p-values we want to we consider the variable being relevant or not. Because if we want to do this, we have also other methods that provide just the importance score without p-values, and how can we also define and being important? It will go to another question.
Okay.
So to have like this fair comparison approaches.
Okay. So on slide 42, you present your result on the CAN-CAN dataset.
Yes.
Yeah, you speak about the distribution of the importance of the frequency band,
yes.
especially for the mag part.
Yes.
And so you investigate this a little bit more in the Lemon dataset, is that so?
No. In fact, we didn't investigate this. Yeah. We assume that it is related to. So we have small effects within each frequency band, and by editing these small effects, we have the whole modality being important. but we didn't export this. In the Lemon dataset, we aim to the EEG signals, so another source of data.
And
So we have, I think, different decoration of the data, source of decoration. So between MEG and UG.
And for Lemon dataset, yeah, you find different different frequency band, and I was quite surprised about your results that capture also very low frequency.
Yes.
Do you have any explanation for?
We think it is related to maybe some movement in the eyes of the different individuals that capture this energy in low frequencies. But but also the conditional approach did validate it, I think. So I think by comparing with the permutation, it validated. But for the beta bands, it was like a total rewrite.
Yes. But especially for very low
and
C, it might occur, but for frequency close to alpha.
Yeah, I think theta increases in H people. So in H people, the theta also increases for this group.
Okay. And yeah, to be able to refine those results, do you think the limitation comes from the data availability or from the classifier power?
What limitation? Sorry.
So, for example, to have more accurate results, or maybe to refine the especially when you have band like that. Sometimes it's very important to be able to be more precise.
Yes, I think we need more samples if you want to get to more accurate results. But I think also here we didn't apply the DNN because we don't have enough samples. We just applied a simple model. But if you want like to have more, also to be have more like different perspectives, we can have more samples. Apply the same principle on more samples with the DNN to see if it change or to keep the same flow.
And from your perspective, what is the most important? Having more sample or having a better classifier or classifier with it?
Better classifier. Better classifier that capture the information that they. Because also, as I mentioned, that if you want to compute the conditional approach, but no, I think it's both to have a better classifier and samples. Because at the end of the day, if you want to assess the importance, it is assessed on a small batch of data. So 80% of the data is used for train, for example, and 20% to assess the importance. And with a small bunch of data, like 200, we don't have enough to compute the importance. So we want more samples, but also we want to have this a good classifier. I think both are important conditions.
And yes, regarding the next step, yeah, I think this work is very interesting to estimate this the importance of the different features. But you talked a lot about scikit-learn, machine learning estimator that are at the center of your work. But do you have any strategy or planning to maybe convince people that are outside this Python community, maybe on the...
Yes. So first, we talked about scikit-learn estimators because I think they are mostly used, but also we can bring a more, let's say, more refactored functions to include also other models like XGBoost, for example, not part of scikit-learn. And also we are in the implementation, we provide R because I think most of the community, they use R. So also there is an R implementation. So I think this will also encourage more people to use it either in the clinical trials or for more research. Thank you very much.
Can you listen to the advisors?
Yeah, Ahmad, thank you. This has been a real journey, only for you, also for me. And, yeah, I really want to congratulate you. This is a once in a life step, unless you want to do 3 PhDs. I think I don't recommend.
Yeah.
I want to share a few thoughts about this journey. So I think it started in the middle of COVID, around 2020, right? Or 2000,
yeah, first 2021.
2020. So, and yeah, I think we started with this relatively big idea to advance the state of the art somehow in variable importance methods without having from the beginning on the clearest idea.
Yes.
And I think this entire thesis is a very nice example of what comes to mind when thinking about slow science. So sometimes I'm under the impression that people can be in a rush to say, oh, I have to publish a paper every year. And if I don't do it like that, maybe something is wrong and my peers are publishing every year. And instead, I think you were unshakable in your trust in the project, but also in yourself. And until now, until the defense, I see you improving, climbing, and you don't stop, you know? And you kept improving this work. And in year 3, we have the publications that really then make the breakthrough. And I was really impressed by this. Yeah? And you were really unshakable in your effort, but also in your trust. And I think these are really qualities of a researcher, yeah? Endurance and this persistence. Another thought, I also think that you were really willing to take the extra mile and don't leave any stone unturned. So you could have said in the beginning, oh, let's focus only on the Python work because we are more comfortable with Python as a Python lab. And then we said, hey, but there are so many methods that are actually written in R. And you did not send me to hell when I suggested that you should actually also find a way to benchmark the R code. And instead, you really climbed down into this cave of wrestling with R and came up with a way of benchmarking everything under the sun that you deemed relevant. And I'm very fond of that in a way. And again, you were not asking, but when can we publish? Yeah? I feel you really did the work that was necessary to bring us closer to the scientific question that we were after. And I'm very impressed by this, and I'm incredibly fond of what you have achieved. And want to thank you once more for this time. As much as you may have learned during this process, I also have learned a lot with you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmad.
Yeah, can be next. So quite similar to the list. I would like to say that I really liked what we did during these 3 years because I learned a lot. What I liked with interactions we had together, that it was simple. Just do it, okay? We say something and we do it.
Yeah,
and that's it.
exactly.
And that's simple, but God knows that it's not always the case with students. Yeah, so of course you were very especially useful when it came to experimenting, trying things, simulating, working with data, taking time to understand, to simulate, etc. Trying a new method, as Denis explained well. And this is great. I mean, we can do indeed maybe slow because we are really willing to get something reliable for the community, but I think it's worth it. And indeed, it has taken time to get the work out and published, etc. But I think I never doubted that we were on the right track. And in particular, because we had this reliance on empirical results that was really creating confidence in the results. And we even realized at some point that this idea has somehow already been proposed by other researchers, but certainly they did not defend it as we did. And I think that your contribution really valuable. I think this is a success because of the qualities you put in this work, your dedication, your reliability and rigor, and the fact that you deliver code at the end. I think that's very important that now other students can come and use what you proposed actually, we have already seen some publications using your work, which is in a pretty short amount of time, which is, I think, pretty impressive. I would like to emphasize, to me, it's a very good sign that it's a starting point for more work to come. There's a track in the direction of treatment effect estimation or causal inference. So there was a discussion about that with Moritz. Obviously, we did not consider causal questions as part of the work, but we may in the future, and we know that this is tricky. But that it's maybe necessary, particularly in view of applications in the pharmaceutical industry. We're also aware that there is still room for improvement. We need to clarify some of the hypotheses, some of the conditions. I think one of the big contentious subject is are we inferring conditionally on the mu function, or even worse, on the mu hat estimator that we got, or on a broader set of functions? And my conviction is that actually, since we are optimizing over a broad class of function, actually the kind of inference we do is not conditional to the particular choice, but actually so particular estimator mu hat that we picked, but actually it's respect to a broader class of functions. But this statement has to be still to be clarified. There are some failure cases I recently realized. So certainly we need to improve upon that. Yes. But this is what it should be. And so finally, I would like to thank all the committee for the discussion, for your inputs. That's very interesting and very useful.
Thank you. So Ahmad, congratulations for your work and your nice presentation. I just have 3 questions. First of all, about the general aim of variable importance. I think you mentioned several times in the presentation that your aim was maybe scientific discovery. And I was wondering, given the fact that your null hypothesis is somehow a conditional null hypothesis, so the conditional independence between one variable with respect to the target, the outcome, given those covariates. Yes. I was wondering if you could use this variable importance to do like variable selection or variable elimination, for example? Yes, and would that make maybe more sense than scientific discovery? In fact, we wanted to point. Okay, sorry. We want to point the fact that first we want to have some scientific discoveries by having statistical proof of what we are achieving as insights, what we achieve. And then here I showed on the right side that when you remove, to do this variable selection and remove the additional groups, you can see that the performance didn't change. So yes, we have a variable selection. So we have the same performance with a reduced number of variables or with fewer groups. And I think somehow it makes the variable elimination procedure is somehow more grounded theoretically than the scientific discovery. Because as you mentioned, if you have 2 variables that are highly correlated between each other, your variable importance is going to miss the importance of each of those. So you may design groups. Exactly. Take on this problem, but intrinsically, this measure that you're studying is not made for discovering all variables that may be related to the outcome. Exactly. So the workflow that I discussed with Sylvain now. So we can start with a group to know which groups are important, and then we can go inside the variables by first computing the correlation to see what is the degree of correlation inside this group, and then we can see if we can bring more information related to the variables. So maybe a point that I did not understand. So when you're using your method to sample one given covariate, you're using, for example, random forest. You sample, for example, looking at the residue of your random forest. Then you need to train one random forest per covariate. Yes. So somehow it should have the same computational cost than a method which removes a variable. Or what am I missing? So, for example, if I look at a method that removes a variable, so I retain a random forest without this variable, I'm able to compute the difference of accuracy between the full random forest and the random forest without it. Of course, this is usually computational difficulty, especially in high dimension. But with your method, you're forced to train a random forest variable. So what is the trick?
Okay, so here in my method, I'm using a DNN, for example, base learner with a random forest, just like added layer to compute the importance. But if I want to do a fair comparison with local, for example, I should use the DNN for local to remove. So for DNN with local, as I showed, it's super expensive. Yeah, so the random forest, it speeds things up, and the main aim is to have the same base learner.
Okay, so your procedure is effective computational tricking if you are looking at DNN.
Exactly.
If you are looking at random forest,
exactly.
It's not the same.
Exactly.
And maybe a last question about the two different schemes that you mentioned about looking at the residues. So for something, looking at the residues and looking at, how do you say, at all observations that fall into the leaf of the random forest and some.
Okay, yeah, I didn't.
That.
Okay, yeah.
I was wondering about the difference between those two procedures because they seem somehow to be related.
Exactly.
But I was wondering if you have insights about the difference and maybe the similarities.
In fact, it is similar. It's the same idea of we are, instead of computing the residuals and do this sampling step, we are sampling from the same leaf of the instance. And what is the impact? It is also giving us more time savings, but it is achieving the same performance. So instead of doing the residuals and then do the addition, which costs time, we are just doing this sampling from the leaf of the random forest.
Because somehow it may be related to a local variable importance, because when you're sampling from a leaf, maybe not for the whole random forest, but for a tree, you're sampling from some observations that are close to the observation that you're given. So this is not a global importance, it's a local importance for this particular observation. And then what you're doing is somehow you're averaging over local importance.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas when you do the technique with the residues, then you're just looking at some global importance. So this may be a difference, or it's interesting to look at that.
In fact, also what we didn't mention in the presentation, but also mentioned in the thesis, that we compared the local explanation with the global ones by adding an aggregation. So if I follow on your explanation, I can say that we are doing some aggregation on the local explanation to provide a global one that can be used in the process.
Okay, that's all for me. Thank you. So now we're going to discuss. Maybe you can stay in the room.
Within the room, yeah.
Yeah, I just will create a breakout room.
Sorry, I'm back in the main room, but I can't hear you anymore. I just left the breakout room, but somehow that switched off the main mic.
Okay.
Yes, now I can hear you again. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. It's okay now? Yeah? Yes. Okay, so I will read the report. Ahmad Chamma presented with great clarity and pedagogy his PhD work on interpretability in the context of high-dimensional context biomedical data. The contribution of Ahmad Chamma lay at the frontier between methodology and algorithmic, deriving new methods to compute variable importances while establishing some statistical guarantees, in particular by controlling the error rate of the newly proposed method. The jury was impressed by the breadth and scope of the experimental work conducted on both simulated and real-world data, and by the reproducibility of the work, providing Python and R packages. Ahmad Chamma answered to a variety of questions from different research domains with precise answers to more technical aspects. The jury believes that Ahmad Chamma has all the qualities to teach and conduct research projects. For all these reasons, the jury grants a PhD degree of Université Paris-Saclay in computer science to Ahmad Chamma. Congratulations. Thank you.
Félicitations.
So now you should. Do you want to read the? I think yes. Yeah.
Okay. Alors, I will read now le serment. En présence de mes pairs, parvenus à l'issue de mon doctorat en sciences du traitement du signal et de l'image, et ayant ainsi pratiqué dans ma quête du savoir l'exercice d'une recherche scientifique exigeante, en cultivant la rigueur intellectuelle, la réflexibilité éthique et dans le respect des principes de l'intégrité scientifique, je m'engage pour ce qui dépendra de moi dans la suite de ma carrière professionnelle, quel qu'en soit le secteur ou le domaine d'activité, à maintenir une conduite intègre dans mon rapport au savoir, mes méthodes et mes résultats. Merci. Okay. Okay. First, it's an unbelievable moment. So you're talking English for everybody to understand. I want to first thank the jury, Andor, Moritz, Sylvain, and Ewan for reading the manuscript, for the fruitful discussion we had now during the defense. I want to thank my providers, Bertrand, for having me in the team, for guiding me all the way, and for believing in the project to the end. And we have now good obligations. I want to thank Denise for the support. He was supporting me all the time, online, offline, all the time. And we had a lot of good deadlines to reach at the end. It was good. I want to thank my team for the beautiful moment we had, the wonderful retreat, discussions. I want to thank my friends here. I have Adi, Jad, Ahmad, Omar, and also my friends maybe online. And finally, especially I want to thank my family, my mom and my brothers and parents. And I dedicate this either to my mother. It will be a turn to a new chapter, new successful chapter. Thank you all for attending. And now we have like small pool, oriental pool. So we are all invited, and give me your opinion after. Congrats. Oh. Can I have a picture together?
Thank you, Anna, Maurice, was very kind from you. Join, and especially Maurice with COVID, if I understood correctly.
Yeah, I tested positive today, so another round. I'm so sick of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Gute Besserung.
Danke.
Good luck. with the virus. And well, I hope to see you again and to get your presentation another day, another time.
Yes. That was not the second attempt, but the third one will certainly work out. I'll be in touch.
I also wanted to say thank you to Vienna and to Munich. And Laura, Moritz, I hope we can sit together another time and talk science.
It was
Thank
really
you so much
pleasure.
for your time and for your energy.
Thank you for the invitation. I very much enjoyed it. And as I said, it's really a shame. I was very much looking forward to this visit, but there will be a next time, I'm certain of it.
Yeah, thank you also from my side, and congratulations for this great work. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Then nice celebrations. Yeah, and talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.
Photo. Yeah. Yeah, if you have Anna, if you have Moritz, if you have just 1 second to take a picture. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, the problem is I'm in bed. I'm not presentable, so I will leave my camera off.
Okay. You want to take the picture? Ahmad wants to be in the middle. Should we put it? Yeah. Look on the side.
Yeah. Yeah, like that. It's good. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, have a nice celebration. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oui, plus difficile d'entrer à distance.